speakers. Well, I already know where the speakers are. All the speakers are sitting in New York, except for me. I'm sitting in London. And where are the audience from? Just curiously. Jean, Daryl, Aaron, Bay Area, Montreal. Great. Okay. Rome. Andrea, I think you've got some friendlies.
Yeah. Beatrice from my team.
Okay. We don't have any from Germany yet, but I'm hopeful people get here. Diego. So my name's Hamza. I'm going to be your moderator / semi-panelist, and I'm going to go ahead and tee up our 3 speakers and panelists. Sadie St. Lawrence, excuse me, who founded and runs Women in Data. Andrea Volpini, who has co-founded WordLift, excuse me, and Diego Vargas, who is a senior researcher at Fraunhofer IAIS in Germany. So I'll let you guys give your first intro. Diego, can I ask you to just jump on real quick and give a little bit of an intro on your background, and then we'll kind of go down the list.
Sure. Thank you. So yes, I hope you can hear me very well. My name is Diego Collarana-Vargas. In South America, we use 2 last names. But anyway, Diego is fine here. And yes, as Hamza mentioned, I'm a senior researcher engineer at Fraunhofer IAIS in Germany, living there 80 years already. And my background is basically knowledge graphs, building knowledge graphs to bring this data model to companies. And in the last 3 years, we moved towards conversational AI, basically building conversational assistants to support businesses and companies. So I did my PhD in Germany, and as well, I'm very happy to be here today.
Thank you. Andrea, I think you're unmuted. Do you want to go ahead and give a quick background?
Sure. I'm Andrea. I'm CEO and co-founder of WordLift, and we automate search engine optimization using knowledge graph. So I've been working in the last 20 years around NLP, knowledge graph, and digital marketing.
Sadie, please tell us about your work.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Great to be connected with everyone. If you are in New York physically at the conference, I hope to see everyone later tonight for the Relational and Women in Data Happy Hour. I know I'll be happy to meet Diego and Andre later, and Hamza, we wish you were there, but we'll have an extra toast for you for hosting this session. Anyways, my name is Sadie St. Lawrence. I am the founder and CEO of Women in Data. I come from a neuroscience background, and I switched into data science and AI after getting tired of how tedious it was to collect one data point from my rodents in which I was studying. So I studied emotional learning and memory, and I soon decided I no longer wanted to pursue that path in neuroscience and switched into data science and AI about 10 years ago, and was really excited to switch into the field because I heard of this little known thing called neural networks. And I said, oh, well, I work on neural networks in terms of the brain. Maybe there's a crossover between these two. And so when I switched into data science, I first noticed just the lack of women in the field, which led me to create Women in Data. But more importantly, in 2017, I read a report from the World Economic Forum on the future of jobs and work. And back then, they had forecasted about 83 million jobs would be automated within 5 to 10 years. However, 97 million jobs would be created. And so that made me really, really passionate about helping more people with this workforce transformation, particularly with the rise of automation. So I've been talking about this for quite some time, but in the year of 2022, on November 30th, it all started to seem a bit more real with the rise of ChatGPT and the automation that we all know and are aware of today. So really have been passionate about this space, have been lucky to work in the field of AI and data science for quite some time. And now my focus really is in terms of how do we transition the workforce into the new way of working alongside of AI and what will be relevant for the 21st century. So looking forward to the discussion that we're about to have.
Thank you, Sadie. That was really well put. I really enjoyed it. Just a quick background on me. My name's Hamza. I invest in startups, and I've been doing so for the last almost 3 years now. I invest alongside a solo GP. We're our first check-in, and we co-invest with VCs. I've invested in about 35 companies in the last almost 3 years, and about 6 or 7 of them are at the cutting edge of either data or now AI, and I'm sure the rest of our portfolio is trying to do that as well. Before that, I co-founded a couple of startups. One was spun out of a venture studio that I ran that is definitely in the data space. So I'm going to try to ask some questions to our great panelists and try to have a little bit of bias and trying to learn from them just as much as you all are. So I think our first question is for Diego. I'd love for you to just outline for us what are LLMs, as the acronym has been built up on Twitter, LinkedIn, and the like, and how should we start to think about what they are?
Sure. That's of course when we want to apply and to use a new technology, we need to understand what exactly is this technology about, right? And that's precisely one of the first goals we have target since 2 years in my group in Fraunhofer. Because we have seen this technology, taking the world by storm, right? And one of the first elements that we need to understand about these large language models is they are basically generative AI. Basically, what they do is to produce, text based on, training based on a huge amount of data. They pass to a pre-training phase in unsupervised manner. In such a way, they find patterns and correlations between huge amounts of text, and they are capable to produce text similar and comparable to humans, right? That was the main elements for these big large language models that started with GPT-3 and similar models. But now we see that these large language models are switching towards instructed large language models. It means that these models are not only capable to predict, to produce text comparable to humans, but as well they are capable to follow instructions. And here is where the most valuable outcome is, coming to the world, and especially to produce new applications, new technologies.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and ask the audience just to do a quick poll and tell us how many times or how often do you use ChatGPT? And while the audience is go ahead, Sadie.
Oh, I was just going to ask if I could add something to LLMs while they're answering that question. I think one of the things that's really helpful to know about the progress that we've made in this space is some ideas we've taken from psychology, right? So when I think of psychology, we know that what makes up of a human is nature versus nurture, right? So the nature is what you're born with, your DNA, the neurons, the hardware of what makes a human. Whereas the nurture is the shaping that you have from your parents, your siblings, your society, etc. And one of the things that's made us see such an advancement in large language models today is the fact that we took from psychology this idea of nurture, of reinforcement learning. And so before we had the hardware of a neural network, but where we saw great progress in this area is when we put in the human reinforcement into the cycle of this. So we pulled in this idea from psychology of how we, in a way, shape humans and train humans by continually providing positive feedback or negative feedback. And that is what's really led to the advancement that we have today with large language models. I call this out for one reason, because I think it's important for us as humans as we work with these, and I'm excited to see how many people currently use large language models. But for us to remember that we have that opportunity to start to shape them and to align them with what we want. Just as we train our children, just as we shape our society and our friends around us, we are part of this equation. So that's just one piece I wanted to add while we were waiting for the question poll.
I think people are still answering. It looks like we've got 7 out of the 40 some odd votes, so I'll wait a few more minutes. Sadie, could you talk more about how that reinforcement learning works and how that might shape your experience with an LLM or ChatGPT if you use it?
Yeah, so how the reinforcement works is essentially we have an agent, the AI, which is, as Diego well spokenly put, right, is generating its own content, right? It's I think of this, like a baby, right, where it's shouting out little blurps of words and reinforce, okay, no, this is the correct way to say this word. So it's putting out content and interacting with the environment. And then we as a human can either, in simple ways, we do this all the time with algorithms where we upvote or downvote things, or even provide feedback to the model to say, no, this wasn't appropriate to what I was looking for. Each time when the human is in the loop and adds that feedback back to the model, that is really then what can narrow in that content of what it produces. And so where I think a lot of this is going, if we talk about the future of this, is eventually we will each have our own personalized large language model, one that has been shaped by us, just as we have shaped our own family and close relationships because we've spent so much time reinforcing. I think at some point we will each have customized language models that will have been personalized and reshaped by us. But I'd love to hear, maybe Diego or Andre's thoughts on some of this too.
No,
Yeah, I think that.
please, Andrea.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I think that as Diego was saying, we started from the base language model, and then we moved into the instruct language models, and now we are, kind of into this realm of, human in the loop, where we can actually direct the model to say things in a certain way. Still, they just are reasoning engines. So a language model is far from being knowledge based. That's the important part of the equation that I think since we are here at the Knowledge Graph Conference, it's important to remember that a knowledge base is as important as a language model.
Just to add one more element here, and maybe the audience will notice that, just during this conversation, many elements have been, mentioned. In this, the one of the key elements in this technology is that it's evolving so fast. It's evolving so fast. A couple of years ago, there were not this notion of combining with reinforcement learning or using the models to follow instructions. This is just evolving really, really fast, and I think that's one of the main, worries from many experts, that the speed of the technology evolving is really fast, and even for us, it has been very very stressful experience trying to follow up what all the elements, all the new developments, all the new things, libraries, ideas that appears on internet every day, every week, is very hard. It's very hard to follow. So that brings, of course, for people like my team who are working on understanding and building these large language models, a lot of stress.
Stress is
Also, a
not
lot of
something
opportunities.
that might
It's an
be the
interesting
better
point,
way to
isn't it?
look at it.
Yeah. I mean, there are opportunities on one side of this tremendous acceleration. Of course, when you're working on it, it also brings a lot of stress, because you're doing something, and then all of a sudden there is something that it's a lot better than what you've been building on. But this phenomenon of acceleration, it also brings a tremendous opportunity for society, as long as we understand the limitation of the technology.
So it looks like everyone knows what ChatGPT is. That's great, and it looks like about 24% of people use it daily to several times a week. And I'm going to publish another poll here, and I'd like to tee up another question while we do that. So I'd love to know if your workplace or your business is encouraging you guys to use LLMs or not. I use LLMs on purpose because you could use other models like Bard if you're a Google fan. And I'd love to understand from you, Diego, or on how you would categorize the components of an LLM. So Sadie touched on reinforcement learning, but we also know there's a large set of data that these are trained on, and that set's gotten bigger. So maybe you could lay out for us what the components are so that we can get our mind around the context, and then we'll dive deeper.
Sure. For first, of course, the main element is a lot of data. You need huge amounts of data, and from where most of the data is coming from the web, right? So most of these models are heavily trained on data from the web, and of course that brings a lot of risks and for example, the bias that we find on the internet is brought to the model because the text on the internet, contains a lot of bias regarding several topics, several domains, right? And another challenge regarding the data part is how you evaluate the quality of this data. This is a very important element to build these large language models. And the problem is that you're working with data at very huge scale. That brings another element that you need to put on the table to really build or to prepare these large language models, which is infrastructure, right? These large language models are not cheap to train, to pre-train, to build. So you really definitely need a lot of resources to make this, the pre-training of these large language models. And for example, in Germany, there are a lot of supercomputer institutions, organizations that we can partner with in order to schedule to get access to these large resources of computation. Then, of course, it is the pre-training phase where you definitely need an architecture. Basically, in that regard, I would say that there's, beside the transformer model, who is the basis of these large language models, we have the GPT-style models, which basically are not changing too much regarding the initial architecture, but basically you need these new architectural models that are designed to train and to build these large language models at scale. So they are capable to, follow a training process in parallel, so they can use all this huge amount of data, right? And once you have this phase, the result is a model, huge large language models. We are talking about billions of parameters. GPT-3 is 175 billion parameters. Then you have to evaluate this, right? You have to evaluate how well these models are doing to solve different tasks. Because there is a very nice characteristic of these large language models that the bigger they get, new capabilities emerge. So this is something that has been remarked by several authors. You can find this information on the internet. And with the same model, you can solve many different problems, from translation, from question answering, summarization. Different tasks can be achieved with the same model.
Thank you for that. I would love to tee it up for Sadie on our second core question, which is, well, why do these matter, and why should we care?
Yeah, I think the biggest portion of why they matter is just the effects that they're going to have on the way we work. So, the most famous large language model out there is the one by OpenAI, ChatGPT-4. I think most of us have probably seen the exams and tests it have passed, right? Pretty much every standardized, college exam, high school AP classes, etc. It has passed with an 80 plus percentile score. So what we're dealing with is we're dealing with a knowledge source that, in terms of its IQ, is smarter than 99% of the people, right? So just think about that. If you want to play for the pro subscription for relatively cheap, right, to use as a consumer, not as Diego mentioned, to train, right? It's expensive to train, but to use as a consumer, relatively cheap and easily, we have access to what can seem to many of us like this infinite amount of intelligence. And this intelligence now can assist us in our day-to-day work. So why this matters is because, one, we must understand that we live in a digital world today. So, individuals spend, in the US at least, spend over 7 hours of their time on a screen. The majority of how we work is in this digital space. So we're used to working in a digital space. When we add in, intelligence digital assistants, that has the potential to reshape a large portion of the workforce and a large portion of how we operate as a society. From that, then once we reshape work, there are many downstream effects that take place, right? So much of our economies are based on gross domestic product, right? What do we produce? And so when we change what we produce because of being enabled by AI, it changes the economic landscape, which then changes the social landscape. So we're embarking in what I feel is a string of domino effect, where we have now had this force multiplier that has come into our environment that, as it begins to roll out and get implemented, will have large impacts on work, economics, and society as we move forward.
I've got an interesting question for Andrea that you touched on, which is, and there's been a lot of debate on this, which is the AI really intelligent today? Or is that what we think it is based on the interface? So, Andrea, would you
general,
share with us?
We have to come to a definition of what is intelligent, and we haven't done enough studies, I think, to describe precisely what we mean as a society to be sentient or intelligent. But simple answer is no. There's no intelligence at the moment in a machine that can predict the next sentence or the next word. At the same time, we can simulate, some of the ability of the human mind of reasoning, and that's pretty impressive and powerful. And therefore, it does bring us back to what Sadie was saying of the societal impact of all of these. But as a computer scientist, we can say no, these are not sentient machines. These are just black box. They are capable of statistically predicting what the next token would be. And if the token is a word, or if the token is a sentence, it's gonna work pretty much the same. Having said that, of course, Diego also anticipated that these models, especially when we scale up the size, show some emerging behaviors. And that means that emerging is a behavior that we cannot observe in a smaller scale models, but we can observe in larger scale models. And these emergent abilities sounds to be mysterious in a way, but what is really mysterious is that we do not provide enough clarity and visibility on the training data set in most cases. And therefore, the society is somehow also it doesn't clearly see what's going on because we don't have access to the full data set that these models have been trained on. And this is a big problem because, of course, in order to have a safer society and to safely use artificial intelligence, we have to be transparent also on the data sources. Otherwise, we start debating about emergent behaviors as something that is magical, but it is really not. It's just that we do not have access to the training data set that it's behind GPT-3 or GPT-4.
That brings me to two different forks in the road, and I'll explore them differently. One is safety, and the other is possibility. So I think we were on the possibility track. So I'll tee it back to Sadie, and then we'll go to Diego, which is, what are the possibilities, or based on the known capabilities, not the unknown yet, based on the known capabilities that we are seeing in Twitter sphere and everywhere else, and or that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, so I'm going to reference a paper called GPTs Are GPTs. I'd highly encourage everyone to read that because I think it's the most comprehensive paper on the capabilities of some of these models today, particularly on work, right? And particularly the way we work. So what the paper does, it goes through and it looks at different roles and the tasks that they have, and looks which one of those roles and tasks can be done by GPTs. So what it finds is tasks that are, high on critical thinking, even some scientific thinking and writing, those are highly impacted by these models. So if you break that down, what does that mean? It is very good at writing, which we all know and makes sense. It's a language model. So there's many applications for that. And the second, though, is it's actually good at software programming and software engineering. And why is that? Because software engineering is also a language, right? So I think those are the two main buckets. But when we start to break that down, and in the paper it further explains this, when they're looking at the US population today, 80% of people could have at least 10% of their work automated by these models. And then there is about 19% of people could have 90% of their tasks automated by these models. So the scale of what it can do is quite large, but I would start thinking it always in terms of, the writing tasks, the programming tasks, any tasks, really simply put, that uses language. It is something that I am incorporating into my work, my team's work, because I believe that it's better to work with the machine than against the machine.
Diego, I would love for your point of view on this.
Regarding the application, the potential application of the large language models, right? No, of course, these technologies has a unlimited, I would say, potential to, as I said before, cover several and speed up the development of several applications, right? As I mentioned before, and we can see already just by looking on the news that this technology is, I would say, the fastest technology going from research into application, right? If we see, for example, how GitHub Copilot, when in a very short amount of time from research into production, and we see the same with ChatGPT after it was announced. A couple of weeks later, Microsoft announced that it was, it is integrated in the Office 365 suite. All right. So that brings us, a lot of opportunities, and as well a lot of new ways to develop and speed up, the development of applications. As I said before, in different scenarios: education, healthcare. As I mentioned before, we work a lot with conversational assistants, and the conversational assistants can, support in many domains. As I mentioned, education, healthcare, manufacturing, inside, plants, helping workers. They're definitely that's uh, definitely a very huge potential to, to develop new applications with this technology.
So Sadie touched on a really interesting point from the paper GPT is GPT, which is automation. And since everyone's familiar with chat, it begs the biggest question, which is being talked a lot about, which is how do you interact with these agents, if you want to call them, or if you want to use agent GPT, and how do you write the instructions so that you actually use the right one? So automation is limited by my ability to use it correctly, and if I can feed it the right prompt and feed it the right instruction, then my ability to use it goes greater and greater. So Andrea, could you elaborate on how prompt generation, if you want to call it that, can enable the capabilities that it already has that we know of?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we learn about prompting is that the first time it never works the way you expect it to work. So whether because we have these fabulous emergent abilities, or because we have to, understand exactly what task we want to achieve, we have to iterate. So prompting, it's an iterative process. Now, in WordLift, we've built a dashboard where the content editor can actually iterate with data in a knowledge graph in order to improve the best prompt, in order to see also how the prompt will react in edge cases. Because again, one thing is going on chat and kind of throw there a few ideas and try to see, what comes out. And another thing is to build products or to create value for your customers and stuff like that. And then when you want to do that, then you have to scale. And so you have to look at more samples of the data, and you have to look at edge cases where you might not have all the same, data points for your prompts. And so you want to iterate and customize the prompt as much as possible. But prompting is also related to the models that you're using, because it's highly dependent on the data it's been trained on. And therefore, if you're using Bloom, which is open source, you might, want to use certain expression that would not resonate well with ChatGPT or GPT-4. I mean, they are completely different models, not only because of their architecture, but mostly because of the data. And the data makes it, difficult to find the right prompt. So one
Sadie,
piece of advice that I have here is that one piece of advice, and then I'll send it to Sadie, is that when you read, the 10 best prompts for startups or 30 best prompts for SEO, don't read that. Okay, forget about it. Just get yourself into a condition where you can iterate and get the prompt you need.
Yeah, I would completely agree with Andre. I do love some of the 10 best prompts just because it's kind of fun to see what people are doing out there. But yes, also agree with the iterative process is the best. The one thing that I've found most helpful though in training some of my team to use these models is just a simple phrase. When I was reviewing and sharing my prompts with others, they had this aha moment where they said, "Oh, you just talk to it." And I thought that was a funny statement. I said, "Of course I talk to it. It's a language model. You're supposed to talk to it." But they were surprised is they're like, "You talk to it similarly to how you would message your team in Slack." Right? So what I think is great, and I think is a really good reminder for people, like, it sounds simple, but this is a language model. So just talk to it as you would message, your marketing expert or, the best software engineer you have that you have a question on. Hey, this is my code. Can you help look into this and debug it for me or figure out what's going on? That is the best way to use it. And as Andre said, when we speak, we iterate, right? We say, did you understand me? Do you know what I'm talking about? We go back and forth, and we have to do that the same way in our prompts. And then the last reason I say on talk to it is one thing that I'm very cautious about. There was a recent study that showed how we interact with people in a digital space does influence the way we act with people in a physical space. And they were looking at virtual reality and then coming out of virtual reality. But I think it's something we should also keep in mind when interacting with AI is one of the comments I often get when people look at my prompts is they say, "You're very nice to it. You say please and thank you all the time," right? And so they always laugh because you're nice too. See, the secret
I
is
do
that.
that too, yeah.
But I remind people this. I said, yes, my biggest fear with it is when I interact with it, I'm interacting just as I would my virtual team. And I'm worried that if I just provide command after command, that behavior is going to now carry over to my virtual team, right? Because I'm using a command line interface when chatting with them on Teams or Slack. And so that's just like my one kind of personal word of caution is keep saying please and thank you so that we can maintain these positive behaviors, even in a virtual world where there's a human on the other end of it.
That's really great that you use please and thank you. I do as well. I don't know why, but I certainly feel like I should, just in case it becomes a Terminator someday, and don't want it to feel that way. So Andrea brought up a really interesting point, which is around safety, and no one knows exactly how or what, let's say, OpenAI trained their model on or Google trained their model on. We all can sort of conjecture what that data is. It's obviously the internet, and then what happened with it. So one of the challenges that exists in these LLMs is that they because they're word predictors, they can just keep predicting the next word, and that may not be all factually based, especially when it comes to numbers. They seem to not do so well. So when it comes to these possibilities of application, let's say healthcare, where everything is extremely sensitive, especially in human health, where the safety of the application really starts to matter. Diego, maybe we'll start with you this time. Can you talk about what's the leading edge of how safety is being thought about and talked about, and in the applications that they're being applied in that we know of today?
Sure. That's a really great point to discuss at this time, because the question is, should we trust all the text produced by these large language models, especially in different use cases, knowledge-intensive use cases where you really need to be factually correct? Then you have to be sure that the output produced by the system applying or using large language model is factually correct, right? And that's one of the main still drawbacks from these pure generative large language models, right? So, and we have been researching a lot on different approaches to tackle this problem. And as of our experience is telling us, one of the lines that is basically commonly used now is combine these large language models with retrieval-based components or models. So it means that you externalize the knowledge and you don't fully use or trust the knowledge encoded in this huge neural network that are the large language models, but you retrieve knowledge from your documents, from your structured data, and then you ingest this knowledge into the large language models using prompt techniques in such a way that you steer the output of these large language models, and that as well solve the problem of in one hand provenance. So because you know from, for example, which of your documents you are getting the information and passing through these large language models, who are very capable to summarize, to produce text at the end, right?
Andrea, I know you had a point of view on this, so I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, so generally, of course, we use knowledge graph to validate factual data when this is possible. So that's one approach, is that, of course, we can kind of look at the output. The OpenAI moderation API is also, I think, a starting point that would allow you to flag when a content is violent, or bring some kind of directive bias. The other aspect, of course, is that as we previously discussed, we can use a language model with a chain of thought type of prompt, which means that we can chain multiple prompts and therefore make the model take time, and that's a kind of a nice expression. So if we give the model the ability to take more time and reason on what it has said in the first place, that we've seen that the quality of the response increases. And this is very easy to be implemented at the application level. So these are kind of the two ways in which we can make these things more robust. But we primarily have to feed the context, and so it becomes, again, an information extraction problem, because we have to find the right piece of information that can inform the prompt in context. So we have to create the right context, but creating the right context means that we are able to find the right piece of information for that specific interaction at that point of the conversation, and that's really an information extraction problem.
So let's step away. Firstly, let me address Rick DeNoble. I think you asked the question right before we ended up on the conversation of safety, so hopefully that gave you a point of view of the panelists. Rick asked, why isn't the tendency of these models to happily invent false text, which is great when you have writer's block, considered to be a problem? So obviously in healthcare, that is a big problem, and maybe as a writer, it's not.
Well, I mean, if we want to look at if we want to look at Google losing $100 billion because of the introduction of BART and making a false statement quote, so we know that there's a lot of damage in providing false information. Still, it's a feature of this model. So I totally agree with the fact that this is how they are designed, and therefore we can take advantage of it in one way.
So in the conversations I've had with all three of you, one of the biggest points that came up, and Sadie, I'll tee this up for you, is actually getting through the inertia of a large organization or even a medium-sized organization to apply these models, to figure out what to do with them. I think we all can just access ChatGPT today. I use it every day. In fact, I ran some of our script through here and said, what questions am I not thinking of? That's easy to do. But applying it at scale at a company outside of these individual instances, what are the biggest challenges? And I'll actually let each of you go after Sadie so that we can get sort of a holistic view.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. One, right now, the models we have for use, a lot of individuals are concerned about the privacy of these models, right? So I get to work with some large organizations in the consumer product goods, and they have banned, at least for the time being, their employees using models like ChatGPT. I also get to work with a lot of government organizations. They also have said, hey, please do not use these yet. And the main concern here is, as you're putting in a prompt, just as you would be talking to your friend or your coworker, you may be sharing private information that you would not want to share. So I think that's kind of the first hurdle that we're experiencing today. I think that one will be resolved fairly quickly. I know that organizations like OpenAI came out and said that they're going to be launching a business subscription where you'll have your own private version and models, which I think will help a lot with that. But then you have the second instance, which is where organizations may not want to use a purchase model, but may want to build their own, right? And Diego brought this up from the beginning when talking about these models is, one, it takes an immense amount of data. It takes an immense amount of compute. And so it just may not be either financially feasible or technically feasible based on the amount of data that you have. I think a couple options for that. I'm really interested in synthetic data and how that can help to augment some of these edge cases, so smaller industries where the data may be maybe a little bit more sparse, and we can augment it that way. But then I think, as data product owners, we really need to look at and do the financials on, is it worthwhile for us to build a large language model internally? Or do we plug into a pre-built large language model and source it that way on a private cloud, right? Andrea is saying no, so I'm excited to hear his thoughts on this. But for me, I see a lot more organizations saying, hey, we're just going to plug into the cloud. We're going to use what's on Azure or AWS, etc., and go about it that way. But I think where the hardest thing comes into play is always on the people process. So we know to make change, it's always the three things, people, process, and technology. Technology is the easiest one. Process is a little harder. People, we're the most unpredictable thing. And so the hardest part in implementing a lot of these is changing the way we work and the way we think, into a systems type of thinking, into a data orchestration type of thinking, and the way we work in terms of less doing and more asking, right? Shifting from going to, in a simple case of going to Google, researching, pulling out bits and pieces, copy and paste it, and pulling it over, to now in a model, in a world where we ask. So again, our challenge will always be the migration of people and updating those types of systems. As we have evolved over hundreds of years, we are still quite slow yet to evolve and continue in this process.
Yeah, I totally agree that people are the most complicated part of the equation when introducing, these technologies. And we learned that, for example, it's better if people don't talk with me, but talk with the content team. The people that want to use the language model don't have to talk with the person that creates the technology, because there is always kind of a factor of fear that can pollute the conversation and makes it more complicated for an organization to rely on. Now, we know that, of course, running a model on your own cloud, like we do for some of our clients on Azure, it is an opportunity that brings some level of safety, which is definitely higher than just throwing data at OpenAI itself. But we also know that there is a societal challenge in making this model more accessible and easy to be built for everyone to learn and to study. Because in order also to provide a safer and better artificial intelligence, we not only need access to the data that is used for the training, but also ideally we would like to be able to train it ourselves. And that's why I think that it's important that we go in the direction of creating models that are more sparse and therefore less complex to be trained, because at the moment there are very few labs that can afford the iron that is needed in order to run the process for training. Things are changing fast. Acceleration, it's coming in this case on a positive front, and it's helping us in kind of making these more accessible. But at the moment, the society is kind of under the threat of few tech companies that are capable of managing the training data without giving proper accountability of, and running tremendous amount of computing resources for training this model. And this is definitely not the safest option for society to embrace these technologies. So I really hope that next year we will talk about how we can train our own equivalent model without, because of course it is possible to train your model. You can train your own GPT, but it's just not going to be as good as the one. But a few interesting things are happening on the open source front, so I'm very positive that we'll soon get a balance on this point.
I really want to dig into how you what those possibilities on the open source front are. But Diego, just to tee you up, and then I'll do another poll after that.
Great. No, I definitely agree with Andrea's view that, and basically that's one of the motivations of the current project that we are running. It's OpenGPTX. It is publicly funded in the EU, right? But especially by Germany government, and it's because it's already been seen that there is a risk of depending on the technology in this very important technology, for the big tech companies, and governments different countries are step by step understanding that you need to invest resources in infrastructure. You need to invest resources in training people how to build this technology, train your large language models independently, following your own rules, following your own policies, in such a way that at the end these large language models follow the rules that you define it. And as I mentioned before, this OpenGPTX is an initiative of this more bigger in the EU, more bigger initiative is the GaiaX data spaces, where the goal is precisely that, allowing to build data spaces where companies from the same domain can collaborate to each other, providing different data assets, providing resources in such a way that the model, in this particular case, the large language models, can be built in a more efficient way. Yep.
So I just published two. Thank you for that, Diego. I just published two polls. One is about if you want to build an application using LLMs, and one is about if you want to build a startup using LLMs. So while I encourage the audience to go and give us your answers so we can guide our conversation, it's really interesting to me to hear the conversation around safety, because in the small world of startups that I live in, the amount of AI startups that are building on any LLMs they can get their hand on is staggering. And so the conversation that's taking place in the startup landscape is a lot more driven to what are the opportunities, how do we build a competitive edge, what's the vision that I can sell a VC and build, grab those venture dollars, because now crypto's dead effectively in venture land and people want to get the money. So while we're getting these answers, I'd love to hear from Sadie on how you're seeing LLMs being built actually versus the hurdles that you're seeing these companies. And then again, we'll kind of go through the panel, and then after we get an answer from the audience, we will open it up to audience questions.
Yeah, so one of the startups I advise for works in the space of grants and public funding. And so they're looking for ways to connect individuals and businesses more easily with government funds. So if you're in the US and you've used any government portal or system, you know that it is complicated and difficult to use, more difficult than it needs to be. So what they're looking to do is not only use large language models to better write the grants, but then also be able to summarize those grant opportunities. I think one of the things I'm seeing in terms of how they're building this is they started building on their own, but as we've reiterated multiple times, the cost to build on your own is too high at this point, along with the data necessary. And so what I'm seeing is a lot of startups are taking the pre-trained models and fine-tuning the last layer on top of it for their specific use case. I think there's a lot of opportunity within the startup space for this. And where I think we'll see a lot of progress right now is not necessarily on individuals building their own large language models, but more so now the integration and applications. How we've experienced them as a society is you go to a web page and you interact with it, but we have yet to see this integrated into products. One of the products I really like is Khan Academy. They've started to integrate this as a, individualized based learning application and tutorial. I think that is where we're going to see a lot of the benefits for startups and businesses is taking either an existing product and integrating it or reshaping our way of working through the AI assisted large language model.
Andrea, tell us your view. I'm going to come back to Sadie's point on existing products, as I'm testing many all the time. So, Andrea, tell us your view on this.
So I think if we look at the startup in the generative AI ecosystem, we are one of them at the moment. So we are in the, in these maps usually when there is a kind of a tiny spot for SEO, WordLift is there. And as Hamza mentioned, there is very little or no interest for safety. Simply because most of the products haven't yet hit the market, and so they're kind of in a pre-market phase. But we've been using AI for a few years now, so we're kind of getting out of the startup phase, and we know that safety is becoming important simply because our client needs it, and our client are the one that comes to us and say, "Is it safe to use AI?" That's our client. And that's the client that most of the generative AI startup will face as soon as they start hitting the market. Because, of course, it's very cool to create a demo that is attractive on Twitter and get a lot of signups. But then if you have to pay the bills, then you need the real client. And the real client are the ones that are asking, the question that we went through today. So is it important for society to train our models, or is it important for our organization? And how can we, fine-tune the last layer of it without jeopardizing the data? Or, what type of data do we need? What type of data do we have? And I mean, building a business, which is what a startup should do, it always, requires a lot of safeguards and careful evaluation that at the moment when the buzz is big and everyone talks about generative AI, no one considers. But just wait a few months and everyone will talk about safety and AI alignment as a product feature.
Thank you, Andrea. Diego, give us your thoughts real quick. And then before you do, real quick, I think we've got a bunch of people that have answered the poll. I encourage you all to throw your questions in as we come up on our time. So, Diego, please tell us your view on products.
I totally agree that, of course, large language models will bring us like a 99% there to new applications, new products, but then the last mile is as well very complicated in terms of, as Andreas mentioned, regarding safety. Of course, in Europe, there is always this notion of certifying your services, web services, your products on the internet. So that as well will happen very soon. And of course, if you will like to deploy new applications based on large language models, you will have to guarantee and certify your applications very soon that they are safe. But again, this new technologies open the doors at many levels, so many levels that we haven't seen before. For example, new companies building on top of this whole even stages of building the large language models, evaluation of the large language models, frameworks to develop these large language models, frameworks to connect these large language models to external data sources, tools to track all the whole elements that are being used during the application of the large language models. So many opportunities at different levels to produce a new application, a new service, and run your business.
We have a question from the audience, which is, what's the most compelling use case for LLMs can't even say that word, LLMs, in the knowledge graph space?
Chatbot, I think.
I will agree. Yes, conversational AI chatbots.
I think the name it's kind of reductive. I think conversational AI it's more appropriate because there is a lot of areas in the customer journey where we actually need kind of a back and forth interaction in order to finalize the transaction or whatever task we have to face.
If I was going to drill this down as thinking about a landscape, so let's say anything in the conversational AI bucket is, you could apply knowledge graphs to. But you could also segment this by industry. You could segment this by safety. You could segment this by the context under which those applications are used. So whether you're using them on your mobile phone on the go, or using them on a desktop while you're at work, or you're using them on your personal desktop. So maybe with a bit more segmentation, how would any of you answer the question of conversational AI applied with knowledge graphs?
So one of the areas that I'm most interested in is what we're calling the world loneliness epidemic we're having. So there's a really great chart that's out there where it shows it's graphed by different ages in our lifetime and how much time we spend with family, friends, and then how much time we spend alone. The problem that's happening is as humans, we're living longer, and yet a lot of times once we get into our 60s, definitely 70s, 80s, we spend that time alone, and it's not good for our health at all. And so I know it's artificial. Real human connection is much better than artificial connection. But there have been some startup studies to just show the benefits of having lonely elderly individuals able to communicate and chat with a companion. And so I think that there's a big opportunity in the healthcare space for this, and the psychological space for the loneliness that a lot of individuals are facing, and just the lack of healthcare providers that we have to accompany some of these individuals. So that's just a personal one where I would look into for these conversational chatbots.
Yeah, I've been also working a little bit on a project for social ontology, where kind of the goal is to train a system that would encapsulate everything that you've done and allow you to reason about certain decisions that you've taken. I think that self-help, it's also an interesting area where this model, if properly trained in conjunction with a knowledge graph, that maybe with your personal knowledge graph, could bring a serious advantage.
From our side, we see a lot of potential in manufacturing industry, especially with this concept of digital twins, semantic digital twins, where basically the knowledge graph allow us to integrate and combine different heterogeneous data sources during the manufacturing process, and having a conversational assistant that you are able to talk to your digital twin, semantic digital twin, bringing a lot of value in different scenarios inside companies.
More loneliness.
Well, it
In a
seems
way.
like I just Googled this, and it looks like there's a number of startups already doing this, Sadie. So hopefully, there's less
Yeah.
loneliness in the world. I just talk to chat most of the day, but that's okay. So this concept of we have a lot more time, but I'll try to wrap this up as we don't have more questions coming through. But I do want to pick all three of your brains, which is around this in the startup landscape. Let's just, even if you're building for the enterprise where you do have to go through SOC compliance and you have to sell the large organization, or you're going to consumer, the idea that you can just build on top of using an LLM. So pick your model. If you're an OpenAI fan or Sam Altman fan, you'll go that way. If you're a Musk fan, you'll go that way. And the idea that you can just build an application through a better UI and UX is the vast majority of deals that are getting funded. When you do diligence, or when I'm doing diligence on a deal like that, which is, again, the vast majority of them, the technical question of what's different about your technology has gone out the window. So you can't even diligence that, because if any of you are right about your own personal LLMs, then that goes out the window in the future. And if one or all of these homogenize and they're all kind of the same, that also goes out the window. So where should the competitive edge be focused on? Where do you look if they're all the same or will be the same?
Yeah, I mean, one aspect that you didn't mention that for me it's very important is that the data is equally important as the model. So the model becomes a commodity. Let's say that the model becomes a commodity. The idea, it's not commoditized because, of course, it's unique and has to have, its own value. And then we are left with the data. So my question for, your next startup is, how is your data fabric looking like? What is the data? How is the data coming inside your application? That's the only question that, if I would have to do your job, I would start doing.
So talk more about that, Andrea, because data fabric is a concept talked about here at the Knowledge Graph conference. But different companies, and if you think about the largest set of data, it's Facebook, it's Reddit has really good data, even Yelp has data. So you're effectively moving into the largest companies that have the largest sets of data to train these models on further. So firstly, could you describe what a data fabric is and how should that data come through? And then maybe talk about how you aggregate it.
So a data fabric, it's really a concept of a workflow rather than, it's an abstract concept of how, we can build knowledge from multiple sources. And let's not forget that it's not about training a model, because we say that, the model are freely available or accessible to the startup ecosystem. It's really about building the in context that the model will use. And therefore, a data fabric can be as simple as your productivity tools, your Evernotes, or, your personal knowledge graph, or your Obsidian vault. So any potential source of data can be augmented and improved. So we focus on structured data and everything that surfaces a website, because that's open data. That's kind of the biggest explosion of semantic web that we can find. It's publicly available, and it belongs to each and every publisher. And so we see that this is a tremendous opportunity for building application on top. Now, a data fabric is not just the data; it's the process that would make the data accessible, cleaned, enriched, and therefore usable. And so that creates the competitive advantage. If the organization has that capacity of creating value on top of, a stream of data that can control because he has access to it, he has IP to it, then there is an edge. Then you can build a startup, you can build a business model.
So the hardest part of that is building a mousetrap that gets you the data, or you already have one that has large sets of data.
Yeah, and how augment it, how uniquely you augment the data. It's also another, potential competitive edge that you want to use, because I can have access to the structured data on any site, but maybe I don't have, the ability to run shackle shapes and validate that data. And, that's why I'm here. I'm here because after many years, I'm still learning, what are the techniques for cleaning up the data, refining the data, making it better so that I can build application on top of it.
I will allow us to segue real quick. We have Naveed asking a slightly more technical question, which is, what are the required data infrastructure for building LLMs, and are vector databases the future?
I think that's good for Diego, but I can give you the way in which we're approaching it. So a vector database is only part of the solution because you need to start from, an ontology or some level of knowledge graph that maps, what's out there. And then you definitely need a vector database for some of the use cases where you need a similar, similarity match. But what creates the value, especially in a conversational interface, is an hybrid approach where you can combine, kind of a traditional keyword base with vector-based search. And so you don't want to go just with vectors. And now the industry is just saying, okay, it's all vectors. Now with vectors, we do everything. But I mean, it's been existing in information extraction for many, many decades, and we know that it's just part of the puzzle. It's not the entire solution to it. So you need a solid infrastructure for finding the right piece of content, which is not just vector, but definitely vector play an important role. But the embeddings that you use for the vectors, these are also unique, and no one question, what embeddings are we using? What is the model that we're using for, using the embeddings that then we use for creating the vectors? No one asks that. That, if you want to invest in a startup, ask them, how do they create their embeddings? And if they use something off the shelf, they're not good. Maybe they can do the first pitch, but not the second one.
Diego, do you want to chime in? I'm getting diligence advice in the middle.
Sure. Definitely one of the costs, very expensive cost, goes to data preparation and cleaning. Of course, for these large language models, as we have been discussing, you require large amounts of data. And again, most of the models use data coming from the web, basically from this common crawl initiative, which is dumping the whole web in regular basis. But then you have to clean this text and pass this text through different filters and quality metrics, and that's super expensive. That's why you require a lot of infrastructure to do this data preprocessing, data cleaning, and this is an area that is, of course, has not been explored too much because, again, the cost of doing that, just trying to run a new filter on this preprocessing step is very expensive. So a lot of is still requires to do in this area. And as I completely agree with Andrea, that the people who will take advantage here is the people who knows how to manage and manage the data sources in a better way.
As we come up on our time, there's going to be a survey for you all to respond to. I think it's a feedback survey. I think it's about us and also about the conference. So please go ahead and fill it out. It should be session survey. There we go. I guess you can do it that way. And could you, Diego, Andrea, and Sadie, could you guys then see a world where if there is a rising demand for building your own LLM, There's this law, OpenAI spent a billion or raised and then spent $1 billion just to build ChatGPT. Now, I am an OpenAI fan, so I'd say that they did a great job. And let's say you're not a fan, so you'd say they did an okay job or a terrible job. But either way, they spent $1 billion. That's a lot of money. That also comes with the ability to raise that much money. A lot of startups just die on the way to the holy land of cash flow positive or break even. So could you see a world today where startups build solutions for other startups to build their own models and to do the data processing, to do the data cleaning, similar to how AWS effectively built for all startups? You can see a world where the infrastructure level stuff starts to get built for other people.
Yeah, I would say yes. Short answer is very much yes. And I think that's something all of us want. Is one of the things we don't want is a monopoly on the model of AI. That seems like there's a lot of harm that could come from that. I think if you just take the standard models of Moore's law and how compute doubles and costs go down, it will get cheaper and easier to do over time. And so I think that it's just a matter of taking the time. Now that we know it's possible and how much it costs for some of these, initial models, it's really now just a matter for more startups to come into the game, make it simpler, and make it cheaper for individuals to enter this market.
Yeah, in general, I think that as a society, we want to be able to build these models because we have to be able to inspect them. Now, in the context of startup, we know that right now it's becoming possible also, for the open source guys to create something that is incredible. And just a few days ago, a paper written by one of the Google engineers has been leaked, where he say that we have no mod, and OpenAI doesn't have it either, which means that all of this money has been spent, but in reality, and luckily for society, this has also created an opportunity for others to jump in. And so this edge that OpenAI has had in the past months might not be as big as we think. But of course, I mean, it's a game of distribution. I mean, if you want one more advice on how to invest on startup, the other point is like, what did OpenAI did good that it's so difficult and complicated? It's actually the distribution. It's not really the model itself. I mean, it's the idea of crafting everything into a chat interface, bringing to millions of users, and kind of taking the risk of doing something that I wouldn't have done it myself because it's too risky, because it's exposed society to a lot of issues. They decided to go on and do it, and they, within a capitalistic society, they also forced Google to do the same. And therefore, they have created a distribution channel that wasn't there. That's the unique part. That's why, the VC money have been pure in that direction, not for creating the model, which right now, I mean, it can be eventually, it will be eventually replicated.
I couldn't agree with you more. Go ahead, Diego.
Yeah, from my side as well, I would really, love to see more means, not only for startups, but as well for different organizations to, build these large language models by themselves. Again, we are not talking about, especially with this technology, we are not talking about only, the consequence it brings to businesses, but as well to local governments. This is as well very important for having a technological sovereignty. I'm working in Germany, but I'm from Bolivia, from South America, right? And just think on these countries where the gap between technologies already big, and with this, if we are not able to catch up with these new technologies, it's going to be even bigger, and the consequences are very, very as well important, and we need to consider this as well.
Thank you all. I've had a really good time chatting with you all. I think the audience has given us plenty of questions and reactions. I'm sure I'm going to hopefully be in touch with you all Thank you to the audience for listening to us and letting me ask questions. Sadie, Diego, and Andrea, please have a drink on my behalf at the conference.
Will do.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. Bye.